Go for it.
All right, good day. We are back after an inadvertent holiday vacation break last week. It is the OSU Turfgrass Team Times online. We got Dr. Dave Shelter, Dr. Dave Gardner, and Todd Hicks. And it has kind of become a little bit of the heat of the battle as the moisture and the heat have started to combine to cause more and more problems. Even as we've cooled down, there's still a residual mark after being left. A lot of guys doing well, but there was rainfall totals of 7.5 inches in the last 12 days, and that is not good for anybody. Standing water, though I think most people were able to get that water off before any scald or direct damage occurred. But at the same time, it has certainly increased the level of problems. Now, I have seen forecasts for the next week where we start to get into some of those extreme high temperatures. But I have not seen confirmations of that forecast. So I'll be interested to see how this pans out. But I have seen 100-degree weather, or at least it feels like 100-degree weather being indicated. Other things to keep in mind, if your grass is not dead by the time we get to August 4th, make sure and keep the OTF field day or August 5th, the OLCA field day in mind. And then also starting to get towards the end of the 100 days. And once we get past that, some of the fundraisers for OTF and OSU ATI scholarships are coming up late September, early October. So again, get involved. So without any further ado, Dr. Dave Gardner, take it away.
All right, good morning, everybody. So some weed issues to talk about. Crabgrass has become quite noticeable. It is growing quite quickly now, right? Not yet necessarily seeing seed heads. When you do see seed heads, that's when you know that crabgrass becomes a little bit easier to control with our post-emergence herbicides. But while crabgrass is tillering and rapidly increasing in its coverage of the surface, it can be difficult to control it with some of our herbicides. This here, what I'm showing is that sometimes if you make a quinclorac application to crabgrass that's at the 1 to 2 tiller phase, you can have not so great a result. That's what the orange line shows. And actually, I can tell you I have a trial in ground right now where I put out quinclorac on plots that had about 10% coverage, and it was 1 to 2 tiller. And now some of those plots have 20 or 25% coverage. My point is this: quinclorac works really, really well on leaf stage crabgrass. It works really, really well on crabgrass after it has stopped growing and has started to go to seed. And so that is when quinclorac starts to work much more effectively. And so, you know, watch for that time period with that application. Another thing you can do is you can combine quinclorac with topramazone, a half a rate of each of those, and that works very, very well. If you come to our field day, August 4th and 5th, I have some demo plots with topramazone, quinclorac, mesotrione, and combinations of those products. And I put that out on 3 and 4 tiller crabgrass. And so you can see side by side some of the differences that you get in control. If you see some browning patches in your turf, it could be bill bugs, it could be a disease, it could also just be rough bluegrass that's gone dormant. And so if you had a yellow grass that was kind of, you know, not aesthetically pleasing earlier in the year, and now all of a sudden you've got brown patches in those same places, dig down in there and see if you have plump and imbibed stolons. If you do, you just have dormant rough bluegrass. Unfortunately, the control for that is to let it green back up, then spray it with a non-selective herbicide, then slit seed, and all of those things can be done this fall. But an insecticide or a fungicide is not going to control dormant rough bluegrass. Just bear that in mind. Some broadleaf weeds that we're seeing right now that are a little bit more difficult to control: knotweed, which germinates very early in the year but is persisting, and then spurge and purslane. Now, each of these have a leaf that's somewhat similar in shape, but there are some subtle differences in their appearance. The spurge, for example, has a milky sap. The purslane has more of a succulent leaf. My point, though, is that each of these can be exceedingly difficult to control with post-emergence herbicides at this time of year. I can tell you that I have done trials where I've been commissioned to test the latest and greatest of products and experimental formulations on these weeds. And sometimes it looks like I forgot to mix the product. And so my point is that if you have a problem with these and you're planning to spot spray, use the best herbicide that you can find, but also map that area out, and bear in mind that if you're not quite pleased with your control, that pre-emergence herbicides may or may not be an option for you the next year. These are all annuals, so they are coming from seed. One thing to note also is that if you are spraying broadleaf herbicides at this time of year, make sure that you're doing those applications during the earlier times of the day. Even if the label says that you're safe up to a certain temperature, it's still not a bad idea to avoid applications when temperatures are above 80 degrees. We recommend the amine formulations at this time of year because they have reduced volatility, which is not zero volatility. There's still, you can have atmospheric circumstances that will be conducive to undesirable levels of off-target movement, which could cause some problems with curling of garden plants and things like that. And, you don't want to have those kind of questions being asked. On an entirely related note, this is about the time of year that I get the occasional email from somebody that says that they're having a problem with their tomatoes, peppers, or other sensitive garden plants, and that's because they had treated their lawn with a broadleaf herbicide earlier in the year, and then they're taking the clippings and they're using those as a garden mulch. And just make sure that your clientele are aware that those herbicides do not sometimes break down quickly enough, and that can cause a problem. All right, and with that, Ed, I turn it back over to you.
Dave, the big question is it seashore paspalum that's behind you, or what grass species have you got a fabulous hairy and onion skin ligule?
That's seashore paspalum. Yeah,
I did not make a fool of myself, so I am very happy right now. Okay.
Well, fun fact, we always say warm season grasses have a hairy ligule, and that's right. Warm season grasses do always have a fringe of hairs, but the tropical warm season grasses, it tends to be both a membrane and a fringe of hairs. So like, for example, if you look at crabgrass and goosegrass, which are also tropical grasses, that's why you see both types.
Learning every day. Dave Shetler with the bug update.
Well, I also have to mention to Dave that purslane is a really good edible weed. However, in the patch that you showed, you'd probably get pretty full of that by the time that you ate yourself out of a weed problem.
Yes.
My update today
Dave Shetler, why are you always talking about eating bugs or weeds? Just bring in the goats and spray insecticide. Carry on.
There you go. My update is about bill bugs today. We've been talking about white grub and white grub controls. We're still seeing very sparse populations of Japanese beetle, and the mass chafer population is way down this year too. However, don't let your guard down. Just because there's few beetles flying around, we've had wonderful soil conditions for egg survival of those grubs. And it doesn't take many grub adults, each laying 20 to 50 eggs to build up a grub population in an area. So again, if you've got customers or you've got turf that's had grub damage in the past and you haven't treated it, there's still plenty of time to get it down. Everything's late this year because of that May cold conditions that we had. What I want to draw my attention to are bill bugs. The bill bugs did quite a bit of extensive damage, primarily to Kentucky bluegrass. And that grass did go dormant across Ohio when we had some of that heat wave and a drought period in late June and early July. A lot of the turf went dormant, but with the recent rains, that dormant turf should recover. My lawn here in my background is a prime example of that. About 2 weeks ago, it was just on the verge of going completely dormant. It had stopped growing. It was, getting that sort of a brownish color to it. But as you could see with the recent rains, it has recovered miraculously. And that's where I'm getting the phone calls from sport field managers and lawn care managers. Many of their lawns under their care have not recovered. And of course, hopefully they've gotten out of their truck and they've gone over and taken a look, and what they're discovering is bill bug damage. And they're saying, what should I apply? And I have to kind of grin. There's really not much you need to apply at this time. I mean, you could kill some bill bugs, and if there are any larvae some bill bug larvae with virtually any of the neonicotinoids, probably spiked with something like bifenthrin. So if you're using a pre-made combination, a loft or a lectus would be pre-made combinations, but you can make your own combination by combining the neonic with bifenthrin and applying that. The problem that I have with it is that turf that hasn't recovered is dead. And so you're better off spending your money preparing to slit seed through into those dead areas and get some turf growing back in those areas. Again, Ed's talking about some hot weather coming up. That's probably not the best time to seed it, but again, if your customer has access to water and you can slit seed that, get it up and running. I actually prefer, if it's Kentucky bluegrass that was damaged, I prefer the turf type tall fescues to be slit seed in. Those actually match Kentucky bluegrass, both in color and in color reflectance or light reflectance. In other words, both of them have kind of a dull leaf. Some people go in with perennial ryegrass, and to me, that's a big mistake. While the perennial ryegrass does have the endophyte in it, like the tall fescue that will prevent bill bugs in the future, that perennial ryegrass is usually a darker green and shiny. And so that's not going to match the color of what remains of the Kentucky bluegrass. But of course, you could put Kentucky bluegrass in there. But if you put in Kentucky bluegrass, you're asking again for bill bug problems next year because there's no endophyte in that Kentucky bluegrass. That's all I've got, Ed. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Dave. Last but not least, the man who's probably had the biggest ramp up in diversity of problems, Todd Higgs. Todd needs to unmute himself.
There we go. How about now? All right. Once I can figure out how to unmute myself. Hello, everybody. Afternoon. It's finally turning into a wonderful year for a pathologist. Phones ringing off the hook. Lots of phone calls. Unfortunately for you folks out there, dollar spots caught a lot of you, especially on fairways, areas where you don't have the big protection at, and you've gotten behind. Good news is get a spray out hopefully soon, because if you don't, you're going to be behind the rest of the year. We're running into this, as everybody talks about, the heat, the struggle part of the summer where you just try to get through it. Grass isn't growing, it's not going to recover. So get ahead of that dollar spot if you can. Two things to remember with your sprays, whether it's dollar spot or anything else you're fighting this time of year, when the inoculum level ramps up like it is now for dollar spot, you're going to have to shorten your spray window. I don't care what the label says. If it says 14 or 21 days, go back at least 5 to 7 days. It'll blow right through that stuff if you don't. The other thing to look out for when you're making your sprays this time of year, especially under heavy inoculum, is your volume. You know, Joe and I have preached 2 gallons per thousand for a long time. I get it on fairways. Nobody wants to do that. At least try to get to that 1.5 gallons per thousand. You start getting underneath that, and that's where we're seeing, especially contacts, start to fail. You're just not coating and painting that surface with as much protectant. You're missing portions of the plant. You're leaving it open for infection. The other thing that's ramping up is brown patch. Here at the Turf Center, it's there and you can kind of see it, but it's not what I like to see. It's not heavy. That's about to change when this weather changes here tomorrow or Sunday. We're going to have a rain event on Sunday, and then we've got about 5 to 7 days at least of these hot weather. Brown patch is going to eat you up if you're not ready for that one. The other thing we're seeing, and it's coming and going with this hot weather, I'm sure we're going to see it again, is fair ring. It's problematic. It looks awful. It comes and goes. The problem is when it's really going to get hot like this, it may transition into that killing phase where it starts to turn POA colors, or it actually takes out the turf and causes a ring. The only thing you can do for this is poke holes, get some air down into those root systems. And if you are going to try to use a fungicide to fight fairy ring, probably the best one out there that's recommended is ProStar. And then and if you choose another one or ProStar, make sure you water them in. They've got to get down to the roots. All right. That's about it for us, Ed. Things are turning colors and going crazy out there. So everybody hold on for this hot weather.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to see real live brown patch, just come to my lawn. The turf type tall fish will get hammered. It is unprotected, so that's obviously part of it. And I've had seed in, so I've been a classic example of do what I say, not what I do. So I've been watering probably a little bit more than would be ideal for the situation. But a couple other things I saw on the road this week, some slime mold. And again, the heat and humidity is going to be indicative of that. And it looks like I saw some pretty good summer patch activity showing up on low-cut Kentucky bluegrass. It's like Todd said, we're going to get into some real fun stuff in the next kind of probably 7-10 days. With that in mind, is there anything that, you know, we're talking about that, fellas, your crew, right? They're getting into the heat of the battle now. Make sure you're looking after them. Make sure they're taking water breaks, make sure that they're getting that sunscreen on them, and make sure that you're, as the person that they look up to, is also taking that time where you're staying refreshed and trying to stay in the game as much as possible. With that being said, there is an expectation you're all going to be walking around dragging for the next probably 10 days to 14 days. So try and get through it as best you can. And if there are questions or problems, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We will be here to help you as much as possible. Without further ado, I will say thank you, and we will talk to you again next week.